Please join me in our chalice lighting words. We gather this hour as the people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together. Curious, how many of you have ever been thrift store shopping? So I've also been thrift store shopping, and I find it to be sort of like a great treasure hunt, right? Because there's nothing for certain when you go into a thrift store. You don't know if you're going to find the thing you're looking for, or anything in your size, or maybe the thing you weren't looking for, but suddenly realize you really need. It happens. So when I go to a thrift store, I think it's wise to bring a friend, because sometimes it can be kind of disappointing or frustrating. If you have a friend with you, then you're kind of talking, you're spending time together. It just is a more smooth experience. But of course, I did have one. I've been into trouble once when I brought a friend thrift store shopping with me. Very, very close friend of mine. We've been friends for many years. And we were in this thrift store, and we were going through the racks, and it happened to be, I can't remember really who found it first. But there was this beautiful skirt. And we pulled it off the rack, and we both just instantly fell in love with this skirt. And we were sort of smiling in the beginning and saying, wow, this is so beautiful. You should try it on. I'll try it on. Let's both try it on. So we go to the fitting room, and we each try on the skirt. And wouldn't you know, it looked great on both of us. And so we sort of stood there outside the fitting room, each of us with a hand on the skirt, and just kind of looking at each other, and then the bargaining began. And I said, it would go so well with my favorite pair of boots. She says, it really matches the sweater that I wear almost every day to work. And I went back and forth a few times, and then it got kind of quiet. And we just sort of stared each other down. And I started to panic, because what if I didn't want to share? Even if she was my friend, I wanted it for myself. And then, I'm not exactly sure how it happened, but without saying a word, we both put the skirt back on the rack. We let it go. And we walked out of that store without a beautiful skirt, but with a very strong friendship. And there have been moments in the past couple of years where I've been like, oh, that skirt was so great, it'd be great to wear it. But immediately afterwards I've thought, but what a great friend I have, and still have, because we were both able to let go in that moment and remember what was really important. So I think that's some of why we come each Sunday to worship, is to remember that the relationships are really what sustain us. They're really at the heart of our lives. So good to be here with you all this morning. Please rise and bow your spirit for our opening hymn, Gathered Here. We're going to sing it twice through, and then we're going to do a round. So
it's number 389.
389.
And will you join me now in a time of meditation and prayer, followed by a shared silence? I invite you to be comfortable in your seat. Let your gaze soften or your eyes drift closed. Feel your feet on the floor, connecting you to this good earth, your breath coming in and out. What if today were it? What if we knew this was the last day we would have here living, breathing on this earth? What if today were it? How petty it would seem to hold on to the grudge about that friend who still hasn't returned that book, that tool, that anything. If today were it, how ridiculous it would be to carry resentment through these last few hours. How all that had been done to harm us would slip away in the face of this precious day. How small each of our own shortcomings would become. How minuscule all those mistakes and failings would suddenly be as we let go of all that never came to pass. And if today were it, how foolish it would be to keep spinning plans for tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. Time to let go of all the planning and preparing. If today were it, the past and the future would melt away in equal measure, leaving us with all we ever truly had to begin with. This day, this moment, this now.
Over the past year, I've been living in this area. Marcus and I have spent what we jokingly sometimes call quality time at the Rochester airport. We have had the occasion to travel multiple times over the past year to visit family, to attend work conferences, and it seems that every single flight has had some type of delay or change or cancellation. And a few of these were just short half hour, an hour, maybe 2 hours of waiting. But several were whole days of travel that were canceled or delayed. And sometimes it's been in January, but then it was in March, and then it was in September. So there have been multiple things that have just happened outside of our control during our travel plans. And in these moments when I'm sitting in the airport under the fluorescent lighting, staring at an empty runway and a blinking sign that says delayed, I can totally lose it. I can come completely unglued. I am someone who really likes to have a plan. And if that plan changes, that's fine, so long as I'm in control of changing the plan. And when I'm sitting in the airport terminal, I have zero control. No control over the weather patterns here or in Buffalo or Chicago. I have no control over the air traffic. I have no control over the snowplow or the mechanical issue, and no control over the stressed airline staff who seem to constantly be typing away in their computer screens, hidden from view. I am powerless to this system of airlines, and that is something I struggle to accept. Marcus, on the other hand, seems to have this incredible quality to me to just kind of bliss out in these moments. He'll put on his headphones, he'll get out his computer, he'll play a game or watch a movie. He's got nowhere to go, and he knows it. And all the while, I am frantically pacing up and down the terminal hallways, trying to get on a different flight that might be leaving sooner, that maybe would get us to our destination. I'm tapping my foot in line, making sure that anyone who looks at me gets an irritated glance so they know how important what my request is. Surrender has never come to me very naturally. Does anyone else resonate with this experience? I was sharing about this, and I actually had a pilot come up to me after I was telling this story about my frustration at the airports, and the pilot said to me, "Emily, I'm the captain, and the same thing happens to me." Just last night, I was supposed to come home from New York, but then we were delayed 3 hours. Then I had to book a hotel, and I didn't get home till this morning at 10. And I thought, wow, and you're the pilot. What is so difficult for us about not being in control? I know for myself that much of my plan making is an attempt to create the most easy situation for myself as possible, to try to avoid any pain or suffering. I think if I'm prepared, if I have a plan, then I'll somehow protect myself from some type of frustration or pain or suffering or loss. But so far I haven't found that to be true. There's simply no way to avoid frustration in situations where we don't have control. It's almost like this bumper sticker I've been imagining: suffering happens. Because it does. And it is a quality that has been carried down through religious traditions for eons. The first noble truth of Buddhism is that a recognition that life has suffering. Life contains suffering. So my suffering at the airport might be humorous, and it's really what my friends and I sometimes call a first world problem. I have the incredible privilege of airline travel, the choice of where to go and how to get there and the vacation time. And so I wrestle with how much is this really suffering? And yet my response to this experience tells me something about myself and how I respond in other situations where I similarly lack control or a plan won't get me through. Another piece of Buddhist teaching is that how you do anything is how you do everything. And so if I come unglued in the airport terminal, it says something about what happens to me when a family member gets a hard diagnosis, when there's a financial loss in my family. There seems to be so many situations in which I'm not in control and things don't go according to my plan. Life is one long lesson in adapting and letting go. People living in the United States, I think, struggle with this especially because our culture sort of tells us we should be in control, that we should be able to have a perfectly scheduled life in which we exercise and buy our groceries and plant our flowers and respond to all the emails and make it to bed at a reasonable time. Meanwhile, our checkbooks should be balanced. Our relationships should be smooth and clean. We should be taking care of those in our lives who need a little extra love. All the while, we should be giving ourselves excellent self-care. I think part of the American myth is that to live this way is even possible. And the other piece of the myth is that if we somehow were this way, that we would be experiencing some type of ultimate satisfaction or reward. This ethic of control, it has so much of us fooled. This belief that if we were just more organized or more prepared, that we would be safe, we would be free from suffering. And it's simply not true. What we can remember and remind each other when we forget is that this ethic of control will not get us to some final ultimate destination. And it may not be the best way to live our lives day to day. I remember the first time several years ago, I realized with this very surprising clarity that I would probably die with a long to-do list. That in fact, I wasn't going to cross everything off that list, no matter how long my life was, because even on a day-to-day basis, I still didn't get everything done that I wanted. And this realization had me look at my life and time a little bit differently. It is something I think that was sort of well put by Pope John Paul II. He shared with the community, the Catholic diocese that he was talking with, he said, I have a bedtime prayer. And my bedtime prayer goes something like this. Dear God, it's your church. I'm going to bed. And it's so true, right? I think this is what all of us actually are asked to do at the end of the day, even if our language or our theology is different. Dear world, it's not all up to me. I need rest. I have limitations. I'm going to bed. The Pope, of course, saying this is powerful because this guy has a big job and a big title and a lot of responsibilities and a big hat. He has been perhaps chosen to lead as a divine presence, and yet he recognizes it's not even all up to him. He knows that he is part of something much larger, and he has to surrender to the day. This awareness that we are not in control of our own existence, of all the things that we might imagine we are, it's at the center of an awakened life. Because it's not our organizational skills or our smarts or our education or our money or our ambition or our fears or even our dreams that sustain our lives. It is our ability to hold connection to what is true in the moment, to see reality as changing and shifting, to see what is in that moment and say, I accept. This, of course, involves a lot of grieving and letting go of what we wish was true when it becomes clear that something else is what's actually happening. There is much to grieve in this process. It can be the small things, grieving that I didn't return a phone call to a friend before she left on an overseas trip, mourning that I didn't slow down enough to hear one child's whole story about dragons. And the larger grief, too, letting go of harsh words spoken to a beloved family member. Many of us spend years mourning the time we were distracted and angry. Some mourn choices made around substance use and grieve how long it can take to know what joy really is. People have wrestled with this relationship between desire and will, control and letting go for a long time. A long, long time. Many of you may know the story of Jonah from the Hebrew scriptures. Jonah in the belly of the whale. He's one of my favorite prophets, and I think he has got a lot of lessons for Unitarian Universalists. We might resonate with him because he kind of begins his story by running away from God. And so the story goes like this. So Jonah is a prophet and a teacher, and he's beloved by God, the scripture tells us. And God says to him, I want you to go to Nineveh and teach the people in Nineveh. And Jonah is living in a totally different part of the kingdom at the time, and he's not really interested in this assignment. He's got other plans for himself. And so instead of going to Nineveh, he boards a ship to Taresh, opposite direction. And on this ship, we are told in the story that God sent a great storm that troubled the waters and scared even the ship's very experienced crew. And the sailors became so afraid for their lives that they woke Jonah, who was sleeping on the ship, and they said, tell us why this calamity has come upon us. Who are you? What is your occupation? What is your country? Of what people are you from? Jonah realizes he's in deep trouble, and he has caused deep trouble for others by resisting the task before him. He replies, I am a Hebrew. I worship Yahweh, the God of heaven who made sea and dry land. He said, it is because of me this great storm has happened. Pick me up and throw me into the sea, and the sea will quiet for you. And the sailors did not know how to respond. They were confused. But it was a cold and dark night, I imagine, and the ship deck was flooded with water, and they felt they had no choice themselves. So after doing everything they can to steady the ship, they tossed Jonah overboard. And Jonah surrenders in a huge way. And in this moment, we are told that he is also saved. Saved by being swallowed by a giant fish, where he lives inside the belly of the fish for 3 days. Jonah makes this hard choice. He seeks to care for and protect the people around him while he has to resist his own desires and plans made for himself. I can so relate to Jonah. There have been moments where I don't think I could pitch myself into the sea, but I have been so resistant to what was happening that I have believed that it would be better to be swallowed by a whale than to accept reality. Scripture tells us that Jonah is living in the belly of the whale for 3 days, and eventually he finds himself in a place where he calls out to God. He asks for relief and support, and also names his own gratitude for the experience. It's called a Psalm of Thanksgiving from the book of Jonah. You cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me, and I am driven from your sight. How shall I look again upon your holy temple? The waters closed in over me, the deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped around my head at the root of the mountains. And yet you brought up me, and my life was ebbing away, and I remembered, and my prayer came to you, into your holy temple. Pretty eloquent for being inside of the belly of a whale. Many of us as religious liberals may struggle with, did this really happen, this story of Jonah? And I think the teaching is not in whether it matches historical record, but what is the meaning here? We may not have a conception of God that is present in this story, one who directs our lives or gives specific orders. And yet the teaching remains, because as we struggle for control, we often lose connection with ourselves and with others. What the story of Jonah illustrates, I think, is the same lesson as the Zen teaching. We can let go, or we can be dragged. We can let go, or we can be dragged. The Reverend Seely Katotovich is the minister at our sister congregation in downtown Rochester at First Universalist. And she describes this process of letting go and surrender this way. She says, we tend to think of surrender as negative, as a sign of weakness. Perhaps we confuse surrender with submission. In truth, though, surrender is a form of liberation. It is not only a positive thing, but an act of power, a courageous acceptance and willingness to meet life in its fullness, wherever it may take us. I think this is true. Our liberation comes from our ability to surrender, to see the positive choices we have before us, and to move forward. The essence of our faith, Unitarian Universalism, is that our struggle and our liberation is bound up with one another's. So while surrender is often thought of as a military term, and that definition may come to us first, of giving up to one's enemy, in the spiritual context, I have to ask myself, who is my enemy? Sitting in the airport terminal, Is my enemy Southwest Airlines? Is it the person in front of me in line who might get a better deal than I will? Is my enemy the weather pattern? Is my enemy my own attachment to my plan or my schedule? I can find no true enemy when I look. All I can find is reality and a choice to accept it or deny it, to move through suffering or to move through towards liberation. Control is sort of like riding a bike. If you try and manage every single movement, you won't get very far. But if you put your feet in motion, you make small adjustments as you move, you may find yourself riding along. The opposite of control is not out of control. It is adaptability, flexibility, and resiliency. It is paying attention to the moment and the needs that arise. It is calling out. It is remembering we are connected. I invite you to surrender, not to any particular enemy, but to the sweeping universe in which we are woven together. Surrender and find a little more freedom. Amen, and blessed be. Take a moment, reach out, let no one stand alone. And join with me in our chalice extinguishing words.
We
extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Amen.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.